38 hours on Lake Huron, the last man of the Daniel J. Morrell. There is a moment in this story when 4 freezing men are sitting on a life raft in the darkness of Lake Huron. Their ship has broken in half beneath them. Most of their crewmates are already gone. The wind is howling, waves are crashing over the raft, then lights appear through the snow. For a few seconds, the men believe another ship has found them. Help is coming, but the lights belong to the stern of their own vessel. The back half of the Daniel J. Morrell is still under power. Its propeller is still turning. Its engine is still driving it through the storm, even though the ship has been torn in two. The runaway stern comes out of the darkness like a ghost, and it is headed straight toward them. This is the story of one of the strangest and deadliest shipwrecks in modern Great Lakes history. It is also the story of Dennis Hale, the only man who came home. The Daniel J. Morrell was old before Dennis Hale ever stepped aboard her. Built in West Bay City, Michigan in 1906, the steel bulk carrier had spent 6 decades hauling iron ore and other cargo across the Great Lakes. She was more than 600 feet long, an enormous vessel by the standards of her time. But by November 1966, the Morrell belonged to an aging generation of Great Lakes freighters. Her hull had endured millions of stresses. Every wave had pushed upward beneath one section and pulled downward against another. Every cargo had added weight. Every winter had chilled the steel. Every season had bent the ship a little more. Still, she remained in service. Late in November, the Morrell was sent north in ballast, meaning her cargo holds were empty except for water used to stabilize the ship. She was headed toward Taconite Harbor, Minnesota, to pick up another load for the steel mills. It was supposed to be one final run before winter layup. Dennis Hale almost missed it. Hale was a 26-year-old watchman from Ohio. He reached the dock just as the ship was leaving and had to scramble to rejoin her farther along the route. Had he arrived a little later, he might have lost part of his pay. Instead, he caught the ship. Within days, he would be the only living person left from her 29-man crew. By November 28th, the Morrell was moving north through Lake Huron. The weather had turned violent. Winds reached more than 60 miles per hour, with some accounts placing the gusts above 70. Waves rose 20 to 30 feet, high enough to bury the deck and lift the long hull at unnatural angles. Snow swept across the water, cutting visibility. This was not unusual November weather by Great Lakes standards. That was part of the problem. The lakes do not need an extraordinary storm to destroy a ship. They need the right combination of wind, cold, waves, and structural weakness. The Morrell was not alone on Lake Huron that night. Her sister ship, the Edward Y. Townsend, was also fighting the storm. The Townsend eventually turned toward safety. Inspectors later found a serious crack in her deck, evidence that the same seas were placing tremendous stress on both aging vessels. The Morrell continued north. Her captain, Arthur Crawley, apparently hoped to reach the shelter of Thunder Bay. The ship never made it. Dennis Hale finished his watch and went below. Sometime before 2 a.m. on November 29th, he was asleep in his bunk when he heard heavy sounds moving through the ship. Then came the alarm. Hale woke in darkness. He had little time to think. He pulled on a pea coat, grabbed a life jacket, and ran toward the deck. He was wearing boxer shorts, no trousers, no boots, no gloves. In normal circumstances, stepping onto a Lake Huron deck dressed that way in late November would have been reckless. On this night, it may have helped save his life. When Hale reached the deck, he saw the ship coming apart. The steel hull had opened near the middle. The bow and stern were moving differently in the waves, connected only by torn plating and structural members that were failing one after another. Hale later estimated that only about 8 minutes passed between the first warning and the moment he entered the water. There was no time for a normal evacuation. There was no orderly lowering of boats. There was no distress call announcing the ship's position. The electrical system failed as the hull separated. The Daniel J. Morrell was dying without telling anyone on shore, Crewmen rushed toward the life rafts. Hale and several others climbed onto a pontoon raft near the bow. Then the ship rolled and dropped beneath them. The raft overturned. The men were thrown into Lake Huron. The water temperature was about 40 degrees. In water that cold, a person's body loses heat far faster than it does in cold air. Hands become difficult to use. Muscles stiffen. Thinking slows. Heavy clothing fills with water and becomes hard to move in. Hale surfaced in darkness, surrounded by waves, wreckage, and men calling out. Only 4 crewmen managed to climb back onto the raft. Dennis Hale was one of them. The other 3 would not survive. Around them, the bow section was sinking. Men who had not reached a raft disappeared into the lake. Then Hale and the others noticed lights approaching through the storm. At first, they thought another vessel had arrived. But no rescue ship knew the Morrell was missing. The lights belonged to the stern. When the ship broke apart, the stern retained its engine, propeller, and power. It kept moving through Lake Huron without a bridge, without a captain, and without anyone controlling its course. The stern traveled several miles before sinking. During that terrifying run, it passed close to the raft and reportedly struck or collided with the sinking bow section. The men had escaped their ship only to watch part of it return through the storm. The stern eventually disappeared. The lights went out. The 4 men were alone. They had no radio, no flare that brought help, no food, no shelter, and no reason to believe anyone was searching for them. The raft offered little protection. Waves washed over it, coating the men and their clothes with ice. Hale's 3 companions wore more clothing than he did. That should have helped them. Instead, the soaked fabric froze. Their coats and trousers became stiff and heavy. Hale wore only his boxer shorts beneath the life jacket and pea coat. His body was terribly exposed, but he carried less frozen clothing. He later believed that difference may have contributed to his survival. Hour after hour passed. The men talked when they could. They fought sleep. They tried to keep one another alert. But cold does not always feel dramatic. It can arrive as exhaustion. A person stops shivering. He becomes confused. He may feel strangely warm. Then he becomes quiet. One by one, Hale's companions died. By daylight, he remained on the raft with their bodies. On shore, no one yet understood what had happened. Because the Morrell had sent no distress call, the Coast Guard did not immediately launch a search. The ship had simply failed to arrive. Hours passed before concern became alarm. According to later accounts, the vessel was not reported overdue until roughly 27 hours after it sank. That delay is one of the hardest parts of the story. Dennis Hale was alive on Lake Huron, but no one knew where to look. He drifted through the rest of November 29th. Night returned. He faced another stretch of darkness with freezing spray blowing over the raft. His hands and feet were badly injured by cold. He became dehydrated. Ice formed on his coat. At some point, Hale began eating or sucking ice for water. He later recalled hallucinating a white-haired figure who warned him to stop. Whether the vision came from faith, hypothermia, or a mind pushed past exhaustion, the advice was sound. Eating ice would force his body to spend more heat warming it. Hale also described visions involving his mother, who had died after giving birth to him, and crewmates telling him it was not yet his time. He was drifting between awareness and unconsciousness. And still, he stayed on the raft. By November 30th, the search was underway. Aircraft and vessels began scanning Lake Huron. Search crews found bodies wearing life jackets marked with the name Daniel J. Morrell. That removed any remaining doubt. The freighter had gone down. The question now was whether anyone could still be alive. Late that afternoon, a Coast Guard helicopter spotted a raft near the Michigan shoreline, not far from Point O'Bark. From the air, it appeared to contain 4 bodies. Then one of them moved. Dennis Hale raised an arm. It was a small motion after 38 hours of wind, water, and cold. But it was enough. The helicopter crew pulled him from the raft at about 4:15 p.m. on November 30th. He was taken to a hospital in Harbor Beach, suffering from hypothermia, severe frostbite, and other injuries. 28 men had sailed aboard the Daniel J. Morrell. Dennis Hale was the only survivor. The rescue ended Hale's time on the raft. It did not end the shipwreck. He spent months recovering. He endured treatment for frostbite and other injuries. He never returned to work on the Great Lakes. For years, he struggled with the burden of being the one man who lived when everyone around him died. Hale later told StoryCorps, "I didn't want to be the sole survivor." That sentence may be the clearest explanation of what followed. Survival sounds like victory when viewed from a safe distance. For Hale, it carried guilt. Why had his clothing frozen differently? Why had he remained conscious? Why had the helicopter arrived when it did? Why him? He did not have a satisfying answer. Eventually, speaking about the wreck became a way to honor the men who never came home. Hale wrote about the ordeal and appeared at maritime events, where he told audiences what happened aboard the Morrell. He died in 2015 at age 75. The Coast Guard investigation examined why a massive steel ship had broken in two. Its findings pointed toward the ship's age, the violent action of the waves, metal fatigue, and brittle steel used in vessels built early in the 20th century. Cold weather can make some forms of older steel more likely to fracture rather than bend. Once a crack starts, repeated wave action can drive it across the hull. The long, lightly loaded Morrell was flexing between wave crests and troughs. Engineers call these forces hogging and sagging. One part of the ship is lifted while another loses support. On November 29, 1966, the old hull could no longer absorb the strain. Later, researchers have challenged parts of the original Coast Guard explanation and argued that additional structural and operational factors deserve attention. That debate continues among maritime historians and wreck investigators. But no serious account disputes the central facts. The Daniel J. Morrell entered a severe Lake Huron storm. Its hull fractured. The ship broke apart with little warning, and nearly the entire crew died before rescuers knew where to find them. Divers finally located the wreck in 1979, the bow and stern rest separately in deep water off Michigan's Thumb. The wreck confirmed one of the strangest details in Hale's account. The ship had indeed broken apart at the surface. The stern had traveled several miles before sinking. What sounded almost impossible in 1966 was sitting upright on the bottom of Lake Huron. Today, the wreck remains a gravesite. It holds the physical evidence of the disaster and the final workplace of men who expected to finish one more trip before winter. Their story is sometimes overshadowed by the later loss of the Edmund Fitzgerald. But 9 years before the Fitzgerald disappeared on Lake Superior, the Daniel J. Morrell gave the Great Lakes another warning. A large ship can fail quickly. A distress call may never come, and November does not care how long a vessel has survived. Dennis Hale spent 38 hours on that raft. But the number alone does not explain what that means. 38 hours is 2 sunsets, 1 full night, 1 full day, and most of another. It is long enough to watch 3 men beside you stop breathing. Long enough to believe lights in the distance mean rescue, only to see half of your own ship bearing down through the storm. Long enough for the body to begin shutting down. Long enough for the mind to create voices and visions. Long enough to stop caring whether you live. And still, when the helicopter appeared, Dennis Hale lifted his arm. That small movement became the final act in the story of the Daniel J. Morrell. 28 men were lost. 1 man was found. And for the rest of his life, Dennis Hale carried all of them with him. This is End of the Road in Michigan. Thanks for listening. Please follow us for more strange, tragic, and unforgettable stories from Michigan's past.